So have you ever listened to a recording of yourself speaking a new language and just thought, wait, is that really what I sound like? Yeah, we've all been there. If you've ever tried to master a new accent, let's say the general American accent, you know the absolute frustration of feeling like your mouth just refuses to do what your brain is telling it to. It's a really tough road. But today in this explainer, we're going to completely demystify that whole journey. We're going to use a famous framework called the Four Stages of Competence to break down exactly what is happening in your brain and your mouth as you learn. All right, let's dive right in. Here's the chronological staircase we'll be walking up together today. First, the origins of the four stages. Then, Stage 1, unconscious incompetence. Stage 2, conscious incompetence. Stage 3, conscious competence. And Stage 4, unconscious competence. And finally, we'll wrap up with some crucial caveats. Kicking things off with Section 1, the origins of the four stages. Now, before we get into the stages themselves, we really need to do a little bit of myth-busting about this incredibly popular framework. I want you to think for a second, who actually invented the Four Stages of Competence model? If you've spent any time in corporate training or psychology classes, you probably have a name popping into your head right now. But hold on to it, because the model's background is surprisingly murky. There's this fascinating contrast between the internet myth and the actual historical reality here. Like, if you Google this model, you will almost certainly see it credited to Abraham Maslow, the famous humanistic psychologist. But that's completely false. It doesn't appear anywhere in his major works. The reality is actually much more grounded in corporate management and training literature. Tracing the history back, it's pretty cool to see how the concept evolved. Back in 1960, a version of this actually appeared in an NYU textbook called Management of Training Programs. Then, in 1969, management trainer Martin Broadwell described the 4 levels of teaching. And finally, skipping ahead to the 1970s, Noel Birch at Gordon Training International adapted it into the 4 stages of learning a new skill that we all know today. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, it's that this framework is a highly practical corporate heuristic. It's a fantastic tool, absolutely, but it is not some peer-reviewed scientific law. Knowing that lets us use it practically without treating it like rigid gospel. Moving right along to Section 2, Stage 1, Unconscious Incompetence. This is the starting line. It's where every single accent learner begins. At this stage, you're making pronunciation errors, but you literally cannot hear them. Why? Well, James Emil Fledge's speech learning model explains this perfectly. The science states that, as adult learners, we perceptually assimilate unfamiliar second language sounds into our existing native language phonological categories. Okay, in plain English, when your ear encounters a genuinely brand new sound, it doesn't actually hear it as new. Your brain just maps it right onto the closest native sound you already know. So you aren't failing to fix a problem, you literally don't even perceive that a problem exists. And that perfectly captures the central trap of Stage 1. You cannot consciously fix what you cannot consciously hear. If you literally can't hear the difference between an R and an L sound, well, you obviously can't correct your tongue to fix it, right? This stage represents a massive gap in perception, not just a gap in knowledge. And that's exactly why this is usually the longest-lasting stage, and for sure the absolute hardest one to break out of without a coach or some form of external, objective intervention to point out that difference to you. Which brings us to Section 3, Stage 2, Conscious Incompetence. So this is where that external intervention finally happens, and honestly, it is the most uncomfortable stage of the entire journey. Thanks to targeted feedback, minimal pair drills, or maybe even looking at audio spectrograms, you finally perceive the gap. You can hear that your vowel sound is off, but you can't reliably correct it yet in real time. This actually highlights a massive misconception. A lot of people think, if you just watch enough movies or casually chat with native speakers, your accent's going to magically sort itself out through passive immersion. But nope. Empirical data from researchers During and Monroe completely rebuts that myth. Their work proves that explicit, focused phonetic construction produces measurable gains that vastly outperform just passively soaking in the language. You have to actively confront the mechanics of the sounds. And the wild thing is, the struggle here isn't just physical, it is deeply psychological. There's this fascinating phenomenon called language ego permeability. Coined by researcher Alexander Giora back in the 1970s, it explains that when you start physically moving your mouth in new, unfamiliar ways, it creates genuine identity discomfort. You might feel totally fake, like you're putting on a voice or adopting a completely different persona, rather than just acquiring a new skill. You might even feel a little bit ridiculous practicing those exaggerated vowel shapes alone in your room. And because of this psychological resistance to sounding like, quote, someone else, a lot of learners completely stall out at this stage. Let's push forward to Section 4, Stage 3, Conscious Competence. If you manage to push past that identity discomfort, you arrive at the absolute grind of the accent learning journey. Here, correct pronunciation is finally possible for you, but man, it is incredibly fragile. It requires every ounce of your focus. To understand why, we can look at Robert de Keyser's skill acquisition theory. He separates two types of knowledge. First, there's declarative knowledge. That's simply knowing the phonetic rule, like knowing intellectually that your tongue needs to tap the roof of your mouth. And then there is procedural knowledge, which is actually executing that rule in real, fast-paced, connected speech. Stage 3 is exactly this transitional zone, known as proceduralization. So the crucial point here is that you're actively trying to convert what you know in your head into a physical, procedural habit. And this takes repeated, effortful, completely attention-demanding practice. You're literally forging brand new physical neural pathways, and that demands thousands of conscious repetitions. This definition perfectly captures why structured drills, repeating set pieces like the Rambo passage, and shadowing native speakers are strictly required. Because the moment you get distracted by the actual meaning of the words you're trying to say, your pronunciation will immediately fall apart. All right, now for the fun part. Section 5, Stage 4, Unconscious Competence. If you put in those thousands of reps, you eventually break through to the final destination. At this stage, your target pronunciation has become totally automatic. You can argue, you can be stressed out, you can be totally focused on the content of what you're saying, and your accent holds up perfectly. And there is fantastic news here for adult learners. You often hear about the critical period hypothesis, right? That claims if you don't learn an accent as a child, your biology forever locks you out of native-like pronunciation. But a landmark study by Theo Bongartz and his colleagues provides scientifically backed evidence to completely defeat that claim. They documented adult learners who absolutely reach native-like unconscious competence. So neurologically, it is perfectly possible for adults. But okay, we do need to ground that empowering message with a serious reality check. The adults in Bongart's study didn't get there by just, living abroad and hoping for the best. Achieving native-like pronunciation in adulthood requires unusually intensive training, explicit phonetic instruction, and a deliberate, painful passage through those difficult stages 2 and 3 we just talked about. It's an active rejection of passive immersion. It takes incredibly hard, structured work, not just time. Finally, Section 6, Crucial Caveats. Now, as much as I absolutely love this model, we need to bring everything back down to earth for a second, because the human brain is messy. First off, learning is not perfectly linear. If you get exhausted or stressed out at work, you might easily regress from automatic competence right back to conscious effort. Second, progress is highly feature-specific. You don't just level up your entire accent all at once like in a video game. A learner might have fully automatized their vowel sounds, meaning their vowels are chilling at stage 4, while simultaneously they're still consciously struggling and grinding through stage 2 with their R sounds. You actually exist in multiple stages at once, depending on the specific sound you're making. And this brings us to the core thesis of our entire journey today. The 4 stages are a useful heuristic, not a peer-reviewed empirical theory. It is a wonderfully practical tool. It gives coaches and students a shared vocabulary to actually understand their frustration when they feel totally stuck. But it really shouldn't be treated as a rigid scientific law. Think of it more as a map to guide you through the wilderness of skill acquisition. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn it back over to you and your own journey. Whether you're learning the American accent, picking up a new instrument, or mastering a brand new professional skill at work, take a step back and ask yourself, which stage of competence are you in right now? Are you completely oblivious to your errors, painfully aware of them, grinding through that conscious practice, or finally coasting on automatic pilot? Identifying exactly where you are might just be the exact key you need to unlock the next level. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep practicing.